In this session, we'll just look into what is communication, and then we'll see some of the ways to communicate, and then we'll look into it. What is effective communication? What are the components of communication? And when you want to communicate, what are the hurdles that you face? What are the barriers of communication? When we talk about communication, we always talk about verbal and non-verbal communication. So we will look into what's a verbal communication and what's non-verbal communication. And then you will actually realize that non-verbal communication pays more than your verbal communication. It's more important. And we'll also see some of the ways. I will not say all of the ways because there's n number of ways to improve communication. We'll see some of the ways in which we can improve our communication skills. And definitely when we talk about communication, you all are going to take up a job, a career, you'll go through a lot of interviews. So we'll see some of the things, what are initial for an interview. During the interview, what things you need to keep in mind. Let me tell you here beforehand, when we talk about during an interview, that's a complete lot of sets of things that needs to be taken care of before interview, after interview, during the interview. So I'm not going to touch that part. That can be another session where you can deal with it, and Mr. Vijay will be able to help you out with that. But here I'm just going to give you a brief about, in case if you are appearing for interview, then what things you need to take care of. So by the end of this session, I expect that you will have a brief knowledge about all these things. Now, what is communication? What do you think is communication? So when I say the word communication, what things hit your mind?
It means when we relate with some other people.
Okay. So you talk about, okay. Okay. So when I say communication, what is the first thought that comes to your mind?
Conversation.
Conversation.
Someone other.
Ma'am, communication basically means you said something and the other person understand, and on the basis of understanding, he replied you on that thing.
Very good. Okay. So you're talking about the whole process. Very good. Okay. Now, communication, the most important thing is sending or receiving ideas, thoughts, or feelings. The main purpose behind communication is to deliver a message in a way it is understood. So understanding it in the same way the sender wants to understand, that is communication. You might have come across a lot of people who are good at speaking. They speak, but you are not able to understand what they want to say. They don't understand what you want to say. That means the communication process has not taken its shape well. So that is why when we talk about communication, remember, it definitely talks about sending and receiving ideas, but also in a way which is easily understood and the purpose is solved. That means you want to make the person understand exactly what you want to say. That is communication. Now we talk about different ways we communicate. Different ways we communicate. Can you tell me what are the different ways we communicate?
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
First is no, ma'am.
You can't see my screen, right?
Yes, ma'am. I also can't see your screen.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Right. So when we
Yes,
talk
ma'am,
about
that's fine.
communication, so what are the different ways that we communicate?
First one is that by speaking or by language.
Okay, by language.
Like, ma'am, second thing is by actions or sign language.
Okay, right.
By verbal and non-verbal.
Okay. So you see, by visual images, you draw some images and you communicate. right? You must have played Pictionary, where you can't speak, you just need to draw some images, and through that you play the game. Or maybe Dumb Charades, where you don't speak, you just enact and the person has to understand. You also communicate through your body language, which is very important. You also communicate through written words, which is, as you said, verbal communication. And you also communicate through spoken language, the words, like I'm communicating with you using words, right? Okay. Now, when we talk about communication, it is very important to make sure that our communication is active. So what do you mean by active communication? It should be clear and to the point. It should be accurate. It should be relevant to the needs of the receiver. It should be timely. That means it should not be very lengthy. It should be meaningful and applicable to the situation. So what I want to communicate, I have to work according to the situation. I cannot be talking about playing games and going to the music when I'm teaching in a class. If I'm supposed to teach, right? And if I'm supposed to hang out with my friends, I cannot be talking about work there. So you have to make sure that it is applicable to the situation. Now, when we talk about communication, effective communication, active listening, as we discussed initially for 5 minutes, why listening is important. Active listening is the most important feature for effective communication. Unless you are a good listener, you cannot communicate well. Keep this in mind, please. Eye contact. When you are communicating, make sure that you maintain eye contact. We'll have another hour, we'll see how to work on eye contact, postures, and language. I'm not going to deal with you regarding the language so much because each of us use our own mother tongue to communicate, but definitely I'm going to focus on these two parts, okay? And also questioning skills. If you want to be a good communicator, you need to learn to question. How will you question? When you listen, when the things process in your mind, you will have doubts and you will be able to ask questions. So these are some of the effective things. Now, when we talk about communication, as I told you, there are some hurdles on the way of communication. Now, look at the screen. Now, there are two people communicating and there is a lot of noise coming in between. It happens, you know, when we are taking an online session and by mistake, the mic is unmuted and there's a lot of noise coming from behind. This may happen. So what happens when there is noise? Tell me, what will be the barrier here?
We can't, active conversation can't take place.
Right, very true. So when if there is a noise barrier, then you will see that it hampers communication. So what I want to say, you will not be able to listen it carefully. If you don't listen, your mind doesn't process that question and you are not able to answer it accordingly. So the other barriers can be the activities, people nearby, the physical discomfort. Maybe you're not in a good room, maybe it's very hot and that is why you're not able to understand well what the other person is saying. There can be other barriers like deafness, blindness, learning disabilities, any sort of illness. There can also be a language barrier, which is very, very important to understand. You are communicating in one language. For example, you go to the southern part of India and you want to communicate using Hindi. Well, those people might not be able to understand Hindi and they won't be able to answer the questions you ask. So when you go to, for example, you go to Kerala and from there you go to Kochi and from Kochi you ask somebody on the street, you want to go to railway station and he guides you to some other place. That's because of the language. Also because of some terminologies. Maybe you want to go to the airport and you're not able to explain to the man what does the airport means. and he's not able to guide you properly. So there can be so many different types of barriers. Now, we have to make sure that when we talk about barriers, we cannot overcome every barrier. And that is the reason we try to use a standard platform to communicate. And in India, the standard platform to communicate is English. Some of the people ask me that if I want to be a good communicator, do I need to be good in English language? Well, I would say that it's not that you have to be good in English language, but there is a barrier. Because of the barrier, you should know how to communicate. So if you do not communicate well in a particular language which is understood by everyone, your process, your purpose is not solved. And that is why learning English becomes very important throughout the world. So when I go to Spain, I might not know Spanish language, but I do know English, and those people also know English, through which I can communicate well. Now, when we talk about communication skills, as we said, there are 3 different types: oral, written, and non-verbal, which includes the language, the body language, and the presentation skills. Now, some of the study says that when we communicate, only 30% of our entire communication is verbal, and 65% is communicated through facial expressions, the tone of the voice, the movement, the appearance, the body postures, and the eye contact. Isn't that interesting? Till now, we thought communication only means speaking, speaking, speaking. No, let your body speak, not only your mouth. This is very important. And as my experience, I'm telling you, when you go for the interviews, I have been a part of taking interviews for over more than 5 to 7 years. And I have seen that the more people communicate through their body correctly, mind my word, correctly communicate through the body, the more chances of you being hired. So be very careful of how you present yourself. Now, when we talk about verbal communication, definitely it involves words, a language, and words which we can communicate through. And it is more of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So you see, it involves all the 4 skills. Non-verbal communication, in that we don't need to use words, we just use our body and expressions to communicate. Where there is no sound or there is no words or language involved, and people can feel they can tell how you feel through your body and your actions. And sign language is also important to communicate. And you also use facial expressions. For example, if you want to tell somebody that you're very sad, you make a gloomy face and you don't have to speak. The person knows that you are sad. Okay. Is it clear till now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
I think very soon we'll be ending the session in a minute. So we'll
Yes,
you will
ma'am.
need to log on to the on the same account and on the same password. Take not more than 5 to 10 minutes to log on, please, so that we can continue our session.
Please like and subscribe.